Can you just tell us what it was besides just being a Mets fan? Because there are a lot of us who are Mets fans, but we don't, some of us we don't have the skills to write a book. What was it that got you interested in writing books about the Mets?
Well, I read a lot of books about the Mets for most of my life. I became a Mets fan when I was 6 years old, which happened to be 1969, which was very good timing. I think the first Mets book I read was called The Perfect Game by Tom Seaver with Dick Schaap, which is to say it was written by Dick Schaap and maybe Tom Seaver proofread it. Something. But, I spent, the next 3.5, whatever decades, taking books out of the library, going to bookstores, going to book sales on the street. Loved reading about the Mets. I like writing about the Mets too, although, up until we started the blog, and by we, I mean my friend Jason Fry and I, there was a lot of email and message boards, that sort of thing in the early days of the internet. But I guess I got to thinking somewhere in the 2000s, I've been a fan. I like to write. This is a team that I think a lot of people are interested in without really being catered to, in the New York market at that time. So that was, in essence, the building blocks of my first book, Faith and Fear in Flushing, which came out 11 years ago. And it was a lot of fun to kind of, trace the parallel paths of my life and the Mets life, which is roughly the same age. We were born the same year in 1962. And I think what I discovered from writing it and being fortunate enough that some people read it was that it was the story of a lot of Mets fans, that, we've all kind of lived this life as, I don't want to say addicted to our favorite team, but sort of enmeshed and engaged and kind of marking the moments of our life by, where our team was at a given moment, whether they were in the World Series, whether they were in last place, whether they were trading our favorite player, that sort of thing. So it all kind of came together that way. And I was, very, very happy to have had the opportunity to write that book. The subtitle was An Intense Personal History of the New York Mets. And I think we all have an intense personal history, and I suppose that's why other Mets fans related to it.
Absolutely.
Hey, Greg, this is Mac. You've been talking to my wife, who helps me out in booking guests. She's been messaging you back and forth, and we're very excited about having you on. I got a question for you. Tell the people out there, what was the last book you wrote about the Mets? And just tell us a little bit about the book, sir.
The last book I wrote was called Piazza, Catcher, Slugger, Icon, Star. Came out in 2017. It was intended to capture the era in which not only Piazza played for the Mets and became, as the subtitle indicates, an icon for the franchise, but also, again, the paths that the Mets and the player were respectively on circa 1992, 1993, when Piazza was just coming to the majors and making this name for himself as this greatest hitting catcher ever in Los Angeles. And the Mets, who were, quite frankly, going down the tubes at the same time. I thought it was a great coincidence that about 30 days before Piazza makes his major league debut and ultimately becomes, in our view as Mets fans, the second Met to go into the Hall of Fame as a Met, Tom Seaver went into the Hall of Fame in early August. And it also always struck me as fascinating that, this consecration, if you will, of the pinnacle of messiness of Tom Seaver coincided with the downfall of the franchise. Remember, 1992, it would be immortalized in another book, The Worst Team Money Could Buy. And the next year, when that book came out, it was already kind of out of date because 1993 was even worse. So I wanted to kind of explore the 1990s where the Mets were concerned, keeping an eye on Piazza, and then kind of the big bang that brought them. And shall I say again, I like to speak in the first person plural, us, meaning the Mets fans, and to a lesser extent, or to a different extent, the Mets. And I know that some people kind of look down on the idea of a fan saying we, talking about their team. But, to me, even though I can certainly separate who I am from what they are, I think at the end of the day, you care because you are part of we. So, the book went on to explore, what those years were like getting there, the heights of them in the late 90s into 2000, the World Series appearance, the playoff appearance in 99, and the denouement after that climax of, it's so hard to say goodbye, period. And I think it's important to also kind of talk about the perceptions that we have of those players we love once they've left us, and why it became so important to us that Mike Piazza go into the Hall of Fame, and of course go into the Hall of Fame as a Met. And I think that was kind of what really motivated me to write that book, because it struck me that this was something that we all took fairly personally, as if, this was one more game that we had to win. So I want to talk a little bit about, what that relationship is between the fans and those who we put up on a pedestal. And I think, this came after Piazza goes in the Hall of Fame. There's a Met logo on his cap. Thousands of Mets fans head up to Cooperstown to welcome him into the Hall of Fame. And then a week later, he comes back to Flushing, to Citi Field, and has his number retired, which to that point was an incredibly rare honor among Mets.
I could tell you personally,
that was Piazza in the book.
Yeah, I tell you personally, Mac knows this. I speak about Piazza all the time. It meant so much to me that he went in as a Met. I can tell you that because he's my favorite player. But let me ask you a question about some of the current stuff going on. And I have a question for you about the ownership, but then I also have a small follow-up on something that came out today. So, Mac, I have one, then another real quick. But all along, I've been saying that I felt like the best fit for the Mets is Steve Cohen. He's a fan. He's got the deepest pockets, a great love for the team. Even when he went away, I said, watch, I kept telling people he's not away. He's just waiting. He's biding his time. Now they have bids in there, and it looks like the Wilpons are finally done playing around and they're actually going to sell the team. Would you agree that it's really his team to lose?
I suppose if his bid is as gargantuan as it has been made out to be, and is greater than other bids, and seems to be, again, without knowing anything about what it's like to be a billionaire, trust me, the feeling that it is Steve Cohen. It's not a consortium of people who sort of kind of are interested in owning a baseball team and or think it would be a nice entree or great sport or whatever it is. This is, as you said, Steve Cohen, Mets fan, Mets minority owner to this point. I know he's had his regulatory issues in the past. I don't know anything about being a billionaire. Like I said, I imagine that just sort of comes with the territory. So I'm not going to be too judgmental about that. It strikes me that we've reached this point with an ownership that has been for almost 20 years, the Wilpon family with Saul Katz, who I guess is part of that family, for 40 years has been at least partly Wilpon, depending on the percentages, starting in 1980 and how much Doubleday owned. And there is absolutely no sense of, it'll be a shame to see them go. They were such a part of this organization. We won X number of times, or at least got into the World Series, that sort of thing with the Wilpons. I think we're, with all due respect to whatever humanity Jeff Wilpon, Fred Wilpon, Saul Katz bring to the table, we're all ready to see them go. We're all ready for a solution like Steve Cohen. And all we can do, I suppose, is hope that the figures fall into place, that everybody feels that their needs are taken care of, and that we're no longer looking at a New York National League team that sort of has to scour the bargain basement for players and that sort of thing. So I think you're right. I think he is, the candidate. And, when there's that much money on the table, who the hell knows what's going to happen? But I guess if there's anybody to pull for without actually, knowing the people involved other than their credentials, that this is the guy.